So guys, since I've bought the iPhone 14 Pro, for me this was really a journey to understand that the best this phone, because aside to try to be a YouTuber, I'm also a pro filmmaker and a photographer. So for me the camera is the most important thing by far. But before starting the review, let me say hi, my name is Alessandro and I'm from Italy, and I hope that you'll like the rest of the video. So for me this video is super important because it's like a big summary of all the things that I've learned on the iPhone 14 Pro. In fact, if you're checking the description of this video, you can see that I have a huge list of video all related to the iPhone 14 Pro that talks in depth of some of the arguments that we are going to talk today. So even though that I've told you that I'm a filmmaker, let's start with the boring stuff, the screen. Because this is the first time that an iPhone gets the always on display, and apart to be a new feature, I think that this is cool especially for two things. The possibility to watch all the time your wallpaper, that is a thing that in the past I think that you don't see a lot because it was always black, but now with the always on display you can have the possibility to leave the wallpaper always on. And then the other cool things related to this is the fact that if you are setting a timer, you can see on the wallpaper the minutes remaining on the timer, and I think that this is helpful if you don't want to wake up your phone every time you want to check the timer. The only settings that I've disabled is the notification, because again I wanted to see clear my wallpaper. And talking about this, we cannot talk about the dynamic island, that is a design new feature only on the iPhone 14 Pro. But here, even though I think that the animation are very cool and very smooth, I don't think that this is a game changer and you don't have to choose the iPhone 14 Pro only for the dynamic island. And next to the Face ID, there is the new front-facing camera that is differentiated from the iPhone 13 Pro, because now we have the autofocus also on the front-facing camera, that I think that is a feature especially helpful if you have to take a selfie from far away. And now let's talk a little bit on the battery life, because battery is another aspect of the phones that it is improved year by year. And I have to say only one thing on the battery life on the iPhone 14 Pro, that is, guys, outstanding. And the reason is because it could last for all the day when I was using the phone for shooting video. In fact, at the end of the day you can easily have 8 to 9 hours of screen time, that I think that is pretty good for a phone. After this, guys, it's finally time to talk about cameras. Okay, let's start this section talking about portrait mode, that I know that is not a new feature on iPhones, but I was at the same time pretty excited on the new portrait mode, because with the update on the iOS 16, you have now the possibility to have a blur not only on the background but also on the foreground. And this is cool because previously I had to use an app called Focus to achieve the same effect. So now that we have also the foreground blur, I think that I will no longer use Focus, and this is the reason why I was so excited about the portrait mode on the iPhone 14 Pro. And another improvement that we got with iOS 16 is a better cutting edge, but unfortunately comparing a shot with a dedicated camera, I think that the edge cutting is not quite perfect yet, but I think that we are on the good way. The biggest cons on the portrait mode though is the fact that when you are taking an indoor shot, the shutter speed is too low to be sure that the subject is freezed. And the reason is that with the native camera app we don't have any control on the shutter speed. So I'm a little bit disappointed, because I thought that I could replace a dedicated camera for all the indoor shots, like for example a family memories. And then the last cons that I can think about is that you can shoot the portrait mode with the 0.5x or the ultra wide lens. You can only shoot with the 1x, the 2x that is a new focal lens, and with the 3x, but again not with the ultra wide. But now let's talk for a minute about the cinematic mode, because cinematic mode again was introduced with the iPhone 13 Pro, but now the cinematic mode on all the iPhone 14, so also with the regular, is in 4K. But overall I can say that cinematic mode has an high capabilities of tracking a subject, to the point that in my tests outperformed also a dedicated camera, so I want to say that it's pretty good. And also one other thing that it's pretty good is the ability to change the focus, that is pretty natural and pretty smooth. Unfortunately though, I think that there areas where the cinematic mode has to improve is on the cutting edge, because when you are recording a video, the phone have to process really fast the movements of the subject and update the edge cutting in real time. And I know that this is not an easy task, but I hope that in the future iPhone the processing power will be higher, so we can have a better effect. Also, another limitation to the cinematic mode is that you cannot shoot in 4K at 60 frames per second, but only at 24, 25 and 30p. And for last, we are limited with the cinematic mode only to the 1x lens and the 3x lens, so we cannot shoot with the 0.5x like in the portrait mode, but also with the 2x. So I hope that in the future Apple will give us the possibility to shoot with all the 4 lenses. So if we are talking about cameras, we cannot talk about the 40 megapixel, right? Because since the release of the iPhone 6s that was released back in 2015, the iPhone never gets a bumper resolution. But this year with the iPhone 14 Pro we had not a bump but a real jump in resolution, because we have passed from 12 to 48 megapixel. That is 4 times more pixel compared to 12 megapixel. But you have to know that this feature is only on the 1x camera and also only if you're shooting in Apple ProRes, because if you're shooting in JPEG in the native camera app, you can shoot only at 12 megapixel. But apart to be more sharpened, because of course we have 40 megapixel versus 12, I think that the biggest improvement that we have is the fact that now we can choose any focal length between the 1x and the new 2x lens that is brought again from the 40 megapixel. And the cool thing is that we are not losing any image quality, because when you are shooting in RAW, keep this in mind because it's super important, the phone basically does an incremental crop on the resolution and not to the image quality. And this is different from the past, because in the past whenever you shoot with a focal length between 1, 3 or whatever lens we have on the iPhone, the result will be worse compared to shoot in the native lenses. But all of these, keep in mind that is only true if you're shooting RAW, because if you're shooting JPEG is the same as in the past. Unfortunately though, we have the catch that when we are shooting in 48 megapixel, the shooting experience is about 3 times slower, and also the file size is 3 times bigger. So prepare that if you don't back up your phone on the cloud or on an external hard drive, prepare to have big files. And the last catch is that you cannot use the night mode in conjunction with the 40 megapixel, because let me explain a little bit better. You can use the night mode when the camera is set to 48 megapixel, but in the case that you need a long exposure, the resolution will go back to the default 12 megapixel. If you want to use the 48 megapixel in darker scenes, you can do it, but you have to disable the night mode. And as I just said, there is a new lens on the iPhone 14 Pro, and the hidden lens is the 2x, that is an equivalent of 50mm. Why this is such a good deal? I can think about 2 things. The first is that the 2x or the 50mm is a focal length more versatile than a 3x that is equal to 77mm. And also because with the 2x, since it is an extrapolation from the 1x lens, you can focus to a closer subject compared to the 1x. And the quality result of this 2x lens is like an optical lens, so I'm very happy that we now have again, because we had in the iPhone 12 Pro, a 2x option. Unfortunately though, this lens is not supported when you are shooting in cinematic mode and also in other third-party app. Okay, now I want to talk to you about macro photography, because on the iPhone 14 Pro and the iPhone 13 Pro we have the macro mode, that essentially is the capabilities of the 0.5x or on the ultra-wide lens to focus super close to a subject. In fact, you have to know that on a phone that don't have this macro mode, we can focus till 10.5 cm versus 1 cm on the iPhone 14 Pro and the 14 Pro. So the difference is pretty big. But before everything, make sure that you enable in the settings the macro control, because otherwise the phone will automatically switch from the 1x or from any other lenses to the ultra wide. And this means that, for example, if you are taking a shot with the 3x and you have not enabled the macro control, the phone will do a huge crop from the ultra wide to have a frame similar to the 3x. 3x, and this will result in really worse image quality. Having the possibility to focus so close, it's very cool, but I think that this feature is more helpful for video compared to photos, because it can happen that you can have to focus in a video from very far to very close. But on this side I can say that my favorite lens to shoot a subject very close is not the 0.5x, but instead the 3x, because I've discovered that the minimal focus distance of the 3x is 17 centimeters. And with this minimal focus distance you can get pretty close shot, but another advantage to use the 3x instead the 0.5x is that you can avoid the shadow. What I mean for that? I mean that in order to focus to a subject so close, you have to get so physically so close, and this can create shadows in your shot. While with the 3x, since it is a more tighter lens, you can stand a little bit more far from the subject and avoid the shadows. And remember when I've told you the macro control? Okay, you have to know that unfortunately this macro control only work with the native camera app. So for example, when I'm creating an Instagram stories, I almost use all the time the ultra wide, because if I don't use the ultra wide, whenever I get close to a subject, the phone automatically switch to the ultra wide, getting a worse image quality. So I wish that in the future the macro control will be applied not only on the native camera app, but on all the other applications. And on this section I want to point out another thing. When you're using the 1x, so the 24mm lens, the minimal focus distance is about 70.5 centimeters. That in most cases is not enough. And the last day I was experiencing a real problem. I was trying to pay with an application that used the QR code, but since the 1x has this bad minimal focus distance, I couldn't scan the QR code and I couldn't pay with the application. That it's crazy, I think. Also because when you're using an application on your phone, in this application you can choose the lens. So I think that this is a problem, or at least Apple give us the possibility to choose everywhere the 0.5x. So with this out of the way, let's talk about action mode, because action mode was an exciting new feature that was added only on all the iPhone 14. So the action mode means that we now have the possibility to have videos more stabilized compared to a regular stabilization. But on this side I have to say that if the movements that you are making are not so shaky, for example if you are walking, I don't think that you should use the action mode, because the regular stabilization is good enough. But for example if you are running or if you are using a tighter lens, in that case if you're using the action mode you will see better result. But the biggest downside to the action mode is that when you enable this mode there will be a crop on the field of view. For that reason the camera will switch by default to the 0.5x, but you can then choose all the other lenses. And on this thing I can give you the advice to enable the lower light setting, that reduce a little bit the crop compared to non-enabled. Also another con of the action mode is that you can shoot in 4K but at the maximum resolution of 2.8K. Another con that I've learned is that when you're shooting with the action mode, the shutter speed of the videos will be blocked to about 1/200, and this means that in a lower light environment the shot will be darker, because again the phone uses a higher shutter speed. But this is also a pro, because in the case that you need to do a further stabilization in post, it's better to have a footage shooted with a higher shutter speed compared to a regular shutter speed. After trying a bunch of scenarios with the action mode, I think that now the gap between the stabilization on a phone and on an action camera is closer than ever. But the problem is that an iPhone is a big device compared to an action camera, so I don't think that we can replace yet an action camera with a phone. But a big advantage on a phone is that you can choose a tighter lens, while with an action camera you normally can shoot only on the ultra wide lens. So pros and cons on both. I'm starting to realize that this video is a lot, so if you're stick around till this point, you're the best. But let's go on with the last two topics. So now we needed to talk about ProRes video, that I know that is not a feature introduced with the iPhone 14, but was with the iPhone 13 Pro. But since I was coming from the iPhone 12 Pro, this was the first time that I could experience this codec. So if you don't know anything about ProRes, you have to know that in addition to the H.264 and H.265, we we now have the possibility to shoot in ProRes with our iPhone. But the problem is that the ProRes is not only one codec, but it is composed by several subcategories of ProRes. And in the case of the iPhone, the ProRes that Apple have decided to adopt, unfortunately, is the ProRes HQ. That is a codec extremely data hungry. For that reason, I think that if you are planning to use the ProRes, you should use a third-party app, like for example Beastcam app, that can give you the possibility to choose not only the ProRes HQ, but all the other flavors of the ProRes. And my specific recommendation is the ProRes Lite, but of course I encourage you to do your own tests. But apart of calling these flavors of ProRes, what are the pros of using the ProRes? So I think that the pros are two: less bending and more organic noise. So if you are planning to do an heavy color grading or a noise reduction, I think that the ProRes is better. And I don't want to add more, because if you are pro, you know what I mean for organic noise. But shooting in ProRes has two main limitations, especially if you're using the native camera app. The first one, as I told you, the size of the files that are huge, and you can only think about that a minute of 4K ProRes is about 6.1 gigs per minute, so extremely huge. And if you think that we only have the Lightning port on the iPhone 14 Pro that reach the speed of 2.0 USB, I think that having this crazy data is a huge problem. And of course it's worse when you're using a drop. And then the other problem when you're shooting ProRes is that you cannot shoot in 4K at 60 frames per second. You can only shoot at 4K at 30 frames per second. And even worse, if you don't have an iPhone with at least 256 gigs of storage, you cannot shoot in 4K, but you can only shoot in 1080. But this is really true? No guys, this is not true, because I've discovered that if you're using a third-party app, like for example Beastcam app, but I think that you can use also Filmic Pro, you can choose to shoot not only in ProRes Lite, but also in ProRes at 4K at 60 frames per second. Also if you have a 128 gigs like I have. So this limitation basically it's all a lie. And then for last, let's briefly talk about the Photonic Engine, because on stage Apple claimed that with the Photonic Engine that is available on all the iPhone 14, the sharpness of the images will be increased. And throughout my testing I've discovered that it is true, but it is only true if you're using a more compressed format, like for example JPEG or HIF. And also another advantage that the Photonic Engine has is that the photos will have less noise compared to a model that doesn't have the Photonic Engine. But the catch is that all of this is true, I've tested, but if you're using not the JPEG but the ProRes, the difference between an older model and an iPhone 14 Pro is not so much. But since we cannot shoot all the time in Apple ProRes, like for example when we are taking a portrait shot, it's cool that we now have the possibility to have sharper images. So guys, let's conclude this video. After 6 months, should you buy the iPhone 14 Pro? Now at this point you have 3 ways: buying an iPhone 13 Pro used, of course buying the iPhone 14 Pro now, but also you can wait till around September or October for the iPhone 15 Pro, that probably will have USB-C and I really wish 48 megapixel with all the cameras. So for discussing this topic, let's pretend that you are coming from the iPhone 12 Pro. If you are not coming from the iPhone 12 Pro, you should upgrade to the 12 Pro, because the Apple Pro is outstanding and is worth it only for that reason. These are the reasons why you should upgrade to the iPhone 13 Pro in order of preferences: foreground blur on the portrait mode, macro mode and ProRes video. While if you are choosing the iPhone 14 Pro, you have on top of this the 48 megapixel on the 1x camera, the 2x lens that is an extraction from the main sensor at 48 megapixel, cinematic mode that now is in 4K, and the action mode. And also if you are shooting a compressed format like the JPEG or the HIF, you also have the Photonic Engine. Plus, but I think that this is only the cherry on the cake, with the iPhone 14 Pro you now have a new design with the dynamic island and the autofocus on the front facing camera. After this guys, my review of the iPhone 14 Pro is finished. Don't forget to check out all the in-depth video that you can find all the link in the description below. And if you're liking the edit of all the photos that you have seen throughout this video, you have to know that were edited using my own preset, that I've created a specific package only for iPhone that works both with the JPEG shot and Apple ProRes. But most importantly, let me know in a comment below or on a DM on Instagram. Please like this video and subscribe to this channel to see more content like this. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!